name is Todd Bostwick. I'm Director of Archaeology for Verde Valley Archaeology Center. We are a nonprofit organization stationed in Camp Verde, Arizona. We've only been in existence for almost 4 years. However, this year we did win the Arizona Governor's Award for Nonprofit Public Archaeology. We're making great success. Our mission is to promote the preservation of archaeological sites, and there are many in the Verde Valley, and also to serve as a repository for all the collections that have left the valley and are located all over the country and elsewhere, and also to serve as a repository for new excavations, which we anticipate as the area does eventually become developed. But today I'd like to talk about one of the collections that was recently donated to the museum, because it is an absolutely incredible collection of perishable materials rarely found from sites in central Arizona. I know you're familiar with fabulous materials in southern Utah and even northeastern Arizona, but for central Arizona, it's a very rare collection because most of these sites haven't been systematically excavated or they've been pot hunted and the materials are gone. This particular site is the Sinawa rock shelter site that's located just a couple of miles north of Montezuma Castle's National Monument on Wet Beaver Creek. And it was a habitation site. There's approximately 10 rooms, perhaps 3 stories, although none of the rooms were intact. And one of those rooms included a cave-like room that was at the upper level that went deep into the back of the bedrock. One of the great things about this collection was that it was actually excavated by a professional archaeologist, Dr. Charles Rosaire, who received his PhD from UCLA in the mid-1950s. And the private landowner, Paul Dyck, who owned a wonderful ranch, he himself was a famous painter of Plains Indians culture, protected the site and convinced Dr. Rosaire to come up from Los Angeles. Rosaire was a curator of archaeology at the Southwest Museum and then later at the LA County Museum. And he came up and excavated in 1962, 68, 69, 70, and a little bit in 72, and retrieved thousands of archaeological materials, many of them perishables. However, never wrote up a report. And because of that, Paul Dyck became angry and asked for all the materials to be given back to him in 1986. And then he maintained possession of them until his death in 2006, and then they ultimately ended up being donated by his son John to us just this year. And we've been madly going through the collection to get an inventory so we can have an understanding of what we have. But what we do know now is absolutely amazing. Now, we do have also all the original field notes, as well as 360 black and white negatives. Unfortunately, none of the negatives are labeled. There's no photo log, so it's very difficult to understand the negatives, although now that I've read the field notes 5 times for 6 seasons, I've actually been able to identify things. Another thing they didn't do is put mud boards in the photos either, so we don't know the units, although they did have to put some logs to prevent the rocks from falling on them, and so we can identify some of the units based on where these posts are positioned. But I do want to point out that there were 4 burials, all children. 3 of them were wrapped. We do not have the burials or the mummies. And in fact, the vast majority of the materials we have are non-burial goods, which means that we will have them forever for research. And if any of you are interested, especially in textile research, we have the collection to come and look at now. The crews over those years, which were composed of mostly students and volunteers, excavated 65 by 5 meter units in 6-inch levels to a depth of 6 feet. The rock shelter was pretty much excavated in its entirety. And I want to talk about just 2 particular provenience areas today, which we have some information on, because of a couple of student papers that were done for Dr. Rosaire that were very well. One is The cave-like room, which is about 15 feet wide and 39 feet long, there was a lot of cordage recovered from there, and the paper that analyzed the cordage had some interesting information in it. Just in that little cave room, there were 1,420 pieces of cotton cordage in multiple colors, dyed naturally. Red and yellow, the most common colors. And most of it was two-strand cotton cordage. There are also 1,317 pieces of non-cotton cordage, which included hair, yucca, and bark, and other unidentified fibers. This is just one room. There was netting. There was all coarse vegetable material, and the analyst felt that most of it probably represented carrying nets. There were fur blanket elements, mostly strips of fur that were included in strands of rope or other twisted cordage. And there was a variety of wooden artifacts also from that cave-like room, including wooden weaving tools, fire hearth sticks, and remarkably a wooden fishing spear. There were also many unusual textiles in other parts of the cave. I'll just mention briefly. There was a woven tumpline headband that is spectacular. It's in multicolors. It has raised patterns, and it is just a sterling example of weaving for the Sinawa culture. And there's also a partial knotted woven shirt that is very similar to the one found at the Tano National Monument, that famous shirt. So again, the textiles are really remarkable. And among other various kinds of cordage-like materials, there's a number of rabbit and bird snares, elaborate knotted cordage elements used for snares. I also want to talk about a sealed cyst that is an amazing context because it was located at the very back of the rock shelter. It was sealed, and so it had never been pot hunted. It's an intact collection of a Sinawa storage room. And the rest of the site had some pot hunting, and so there is some damage. But this was a sealed storage room that has a collection that in its own right is amazing as well. It was a 6 foot by 6 foot room that had an adobe floor, but it had a narrow entryway, and the single excavator that could crawl in on his stomach had to excavate with a flashlight on his stomach to remove the materials. But there were hundreds of objects that came out of this cyst. And I want to just go through a brief listing to give you an idea of how amazing these things are. There were 9 sandals, 4 baskets, 2 basketry trays, 4 weaving tools, 2 children's bows and 4 adult bows, a digging stick, 5 pairs of stick tongs. There were 41 arrow shafts and 17 mid shafts. Many of the arrow shafts are painted with elaborate designs and have sinew wrapping are part of the designs. Some of the designs are with paint that shines in the light. They're really elaborate decorative elements on these arrow shafts. There were cloth and leather bags that contain objects that we haven't even opened yet to see what's inside these objects. There are gobble needles, where they've taken the needle and left a thread on it so you can sew with the agave thorn. There's bone awls of all kinds. There are maize cob with sticks stuck in them, which we believe were used in throwing games, using Pueblo analogy. There are a series of rattles, a shell rattle, a gourd rattle, and a elaborate cordage with deer hoof rattles on it. There's bone cloud blowers. There's also antler and bone flakers for napping. And there's a series of really unusual knotted circles with sticks and cordage that look like there's some kind of game, where you hold them and then you throw objects to go through the loops and then score points. And that is just the one cyst. And then we have the rest of the 60 5x5 meter units to 16. So you didn't get an idea of what an incredible collection it is. And I finally have figured out the Verde system. And so we do plan on writing a book about the collection, as well as having exhibits. And what's been especially rewarding for me is that I have actually been able to contact Dr. Rosier. He's still alive. He's 87 years old. I've conducted interviews with him. His main crew chief, who was an LA policeman who took his vacation to come up to be the crew chief in each of the digs, is 91. He's still alive and remembers details about this dig. It's amazing. I give him a cold phone call and I say, by the way, do you remember that dig you did 50 years ago? And they remember. It's remarkable. I've also located a number of students who have gone on to have illustrious careers, getting their PhDs at UCLA, and they have stories and photos, and they are sharing all of this with us as we put this information together. So it's rare that you get a collection of this quality, systematically excavated, where people that were associated are still alive. And as we learn more, we'll give you further updates. Thank you very much.